Let's get real for a second. Most people walk around looking totally fine. But underneath that calm surface, there's a whole stack of struggles they don't talk about. And not the dramatic kind, just the quiet, subtle ones that sit in the background and shape how you think, how you act, and how you show up. The funny thing is, these struggles are so common that almost everyone has them, but nobody wants to be the first to admit it. Carl Jung had a simple explanation for this. We're all experts at hiding the parts of ourselves we don't want others to see, and the more we hide them, the stronger they actually become. You've probably done it too. You smile when something feels off. You say everything's good even when you're stretched thin. You brush things aside because it feels easier than dealing with them. But the truth is, the things we avoid don't just fade away. Jung warned about this. He said the unacknowledged parts of us don't disappear. They just start running the show from behind the scenes. And that's when you find yourself stressed for no reason, irritated by small things, or exhausted by pretending everything's fine. So in this video, we're going to talk about 7 subtle struggles people pretend aren't happening. Not because they're dramatic or huge, but because they quietly affect your life in more ways than you realize. And once you see them clearly, you can't unsee them. That's the moment things start shifting. That's when the version of you that you keep in the background finally gets a voice. Let's break them down, one by one. The first struggle is the pressure to look like you have it all together. And this one is everywhere. You wake up already behind. You rush through the day trying to keep things from slipping through the cracks. And half the time you're improvising as you go. But when someone asks how you're doing, you still say you're good. You still try to look steady, organized, confident, and unfazed. It's almost automatic. You feel like you have to protect the image of the person who handles things, even on the days when you're barely holding on. Carl Jung talked about this a lot. He called it the persona, the public mask you put on to function in everyday life. And the tricky part is that everyone thinks their mask is the only one that's cracking. You see other people showing up looking polished, composed, in control, while you're juggling thoughts you can't even organize. What you don't see is that they're doing the exact same thing you are. Hiding the confusion, avoiding the admission that they're overwhelmed, and pretending the pressure isn't slowly building. And this pressure doesn't show up dramatically. It shows up in small ways. Saying yes when you want to say no. Pretending a messy situation is no big deal. Acting calm when your mind is racing, or brushing off the fact that something is clearly too much. You keep telling yourself it's just temporary. Just a rough week. Just a busy month. But deep down, you know it's not just the schedule. It's the expectation you carry to always be the reliable one, the composed one, the person who doesn't slip. Jung would say this constant performance creates a split inside you. The version of you that's tired and human, and the version of you that's trying hard to appear unshakable. The more distance there is between those two versions, the heavier life starts to feel. And because you don't want to admit that gap exists, you pretend the pressure isn't there. But it is. And spotting this struggle is the first step to easing it, instead of letting it quietly run your life from the background. The second struggle is feeling disconnected even when you're surrounded by people. It's that strange experience where you're physically present, laughing, talking, participating, but something inside you feels slightly removed, like you're watching yourself interact, instead of actually being there. Most people never admit this because it sounds too personal. So they just go along with conversations, respond at the right moments, and keep the mood light so no one notices the distance. Carl Jung believed that when you drift away from your own inner life, your real interests, your real thoughts, your real needs, you naturally start to feel disconnected from the people around you. It's not about who's in the room. It's about the gap between what you're showing and what you're feeling. You can be surrounded by familiar faces and still feel like something isn't clicking, like the connection isn't landing the way it used to. And this struggle usually builds slowly. You start skipping deeper conversations because they take too much energy. You stick to surface-level interactions because it feels easier. You keep things light, quick, and predictable. Before you notice it, you're playing a role instead of actually engaging. You look fine from the outside, but inside you feel slightly out of place, slightly removed, like something's missing, but you can't explain what. Most people pretend this isn't happening because acknowledging it feels uncomfortable. It sounds like admitting you're distant or cold, when really, it's just a sign that you've gone a long time without checking in with yourself. Jung would say this disconnection is a signal, a quiet reminder that you've been focused on the outer world for so long that you forgot to stay connected to the inner one. And the longer you ignore that signal, the more disconnected you start to feel, even in rooms full of people you know well. The third struggle is holding back your real opinions just to avoid conflict. You know those moments when someone says something that bothers you or you disagree with a decision, but instead of speaking up, you just let it slide. You tell yourself it's not worth the energy, or that staying quiet will keep things smooth. And on the surface, it does. But underneath, something tightens a little each time you silence yourself. Carl Jung talked about this in terms of the shadow, the parts of you that get pushed down because you don't think they're acceptable or convenient. When you constantly suppress your reactions, frustrations, or ideas, they don't vanish, they collect, and eventually they show up in subtle ways: sudden irritation, withdrawal, or a feeling that you're not being fully seen or understood. Most people pretend this struggle isn't happening because it's easy to justify. You tell yourself you're just being mature or flexible, or that the situation isn't serious enough to bring up. But deep down, you feel the tension. You feel the disconnect between what you think and what you say. And the more often you hold things in, the more you start to lose trust in your own voice. This struggle often starts small. You dismiss a comment that rubbed you the wrong way. You shrug off a request that actually annoyed you. You let someone else's plan take priority even when it doesn't work for you. You tell yourself it's fine. But each quiet concession adds up, and you start feeling like you're living slightly out of alignment with yourself. Jung would say that this kind of suppression creates an internal pressure that eventually demands to be acknowledged. Not in dramatic outbursts, but in subtle emotional exhaustion. You feel drained, not because of the people around you, but because of the role you keep forcing yourself to play. And instead of admitting this, most people keep pretending everything is fine, not realizing that speaking up, even just a little, could lift half the weight they're carrying. The fourth struggle is the constant inner comparison. This one is incredibly common, but almost no one admits to it. You see someone doing well, someone moving faster, someone hitting certain milestones, and without even meaning to, you measure yourself against them. And it's quiet. It's not some dramatic meltdown. It's just this steady internal scoreboard you check without wanting to. Carl Jung pointed out that a lot of people confuse envy with motivation. You tell yourself you're just observing, just gathering inspiration, just seeing what's possible. But underneath that, there's a subtle tension, this feeling that you're supposed to match someone else's pace or accomplishments. And the more you try to downplay it, the more it nags at you in the background. The tricky thing is, this comparison usually shows up in micro moments. You hear someone talk about their progress, and you instantly question your own. You see someone gaining recognition, and you suddenly wonder if you're falling behind. You scroll, listen, notice, and before you catch it, you're evaluating your entire life through someone else's lens. Most people pretend this struggle isn't happening because it feels embarrassing to admit. No one wants to say, "I'm comparing myself," because it sounds insecure. But it's not about insecurity, it's about pressure. Pressure to keep up, pressure to prove something, pressure to show that your life is moving forward in a way that looks respectable from the outside. Jung would say that comparison comes from losing sight of your own path. When you're connected to what genuinely matters to you, other people's progress doesn't feel like a threat. It's just information. But when you drift away from your own direction, other people become a mirror you can't stop checking. And rather than acknowledging that, most people pretend they're unaffected, even though the quiet self-questioning is happening in the background all the time. The fifth struggle is the classic "I'm fine" habit. You know the routine. Someone asks how you're doing, and without even thinking, you give the automatic answer. You keep it light, simple, and quick, because it feels easier than explaining anything real. Even on days when you're mentally overloaded or completely drained, the words still come out the same way. "I'm fine." It becomes a shield you use so you don't have to deal with questions, reactions, or the risk of someone actually understanding what's going on. Carl Jung believed that the things we deny or downplay don't disappear. They pile up. When you keep labeling everything as fine, you're not calming yourself down. You're burying what you don't want to feel. And buried emotions don't stay buried forever. They show up in irritation, low energy, or that sudden crash that you can't explain at the end of the day. What makes this struggle so subtle is how normal it seems. Everyone says they're fine. Everyone shrugs off stress. Everyone pretends a heavy week isn't that heavy. It's so common that you barely notice you're doing it. But inside, the difference between "I'm fine" and "I'm exhausted" or "I'm overwhelmed" can be huge. And the more often you choose the easy answer, the harder it becomes to admit anything else. Most people pretend this struggle isn't happening because being honest about your state feels risky. You don't want to seem weak, dramatic, or like you can't handle your own life. You want to keep the image of being stable and steady, so you brush aside your own feelings and power through the day. But Jung would say this habit slowly disconnects you from yourself. You start losing touch with what you actually feel because you're so used to smoothing it over. And the truth is, the "I'm fine" habit isn't about lying to others. It's about trying to convince yourself that you shouldn't need help, rest, or space. That's what makes it a struggle people rarely acknowledge. It feels safer to stay on autopilot than to stop and admit you're carrying more than you let on. The sixth struggle is second-guessing every decision. You know that feeling. Every choice, big or small, comes with a mental debate. Should I do this? What if I mess it up? What if I regret it later? Even when the choice seems simple, your mind finds 100 reasons to pause, rewind, and question yourself. It's exhausting, and most people hide it because outwardly you still look confident and in control. Carl Jung would say, this comes from unresolved inner contradictions, the clash between different parts of yourself that want different things. One part wants to take action, to move forward, to experiment. Another part wants certainty, safety, and reassurance before doing anything. When these sides don't communicate, your brain becomes a constant battleground, and the struggle shows up as hesitation or overthinking. This subtle struggle often goes unnoticed because it's internal. No one sees the hours you spend running scenarios in your head, weighing pros and cons that may not even matter. You might appear decisive in front of others, but inside, your mind is spinning, second-guessing every step. It can make even small decisions feel heavier than they are, like the mental effort required to just pick a restaurant or answer a message is suddenly enormous. Most people pretend this isn't happening because admitting it feels like exposing weakness. No one wants to say, I can't make up my mind, or I feel stuck all the time. So instead they push forward, try to act confident, or avoid decisions altogether. Jung would point out that the tension from this kind of suppression doesn't vanish, it just builds quietly. And the longer you ignore it, the more exhausting it becomes to navigate even simple choices. This struggle is subtle but powerful, because it shapes almost every part of life without anyone seeing it. You're not lazy or incapable. You're just carrying a quiet internal conflict you haven't yet acknowledged. The seventh struggle is feeling behind in life. You look at where you are, your career, your social life, your personal goals, and there's this quiet nagging thought that you're not measuring up. You tell yourself you're fine, that everyone's timeline is different, but deep down, that pressure lingers. You see others hitting milestones, moving faster, or reaching things you've been working toward. And suddenly your own progress feels slow, even if you're moving at your own pace. Carl Jung would say this is a classic sign that you're not fully tuned into your own path. He emphasized individuation, becoming who you are, not who you think you're supposed to be. The problem is, society, social media, and even casual conversations constantly remind you of what success or progress should look like, and even if you consciously ignore it, your mind keeps running these comparisons in the background. Most people pretend this struggle isn't happening because admitting it feels like failure. Saying I feel behind sounds like you're not doing enough, when really it's just a sign that you're human and noticing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. You keep smiling, keep nodding, keep moving forward as if everything's okay, while that quiet pressure ticks away in the background. And here's the thing, acknowledging it doesn't mean you're behind. It just means you're aware of your own pace, your own goals, and your own life. Jung would say that noticing this struggle is a big step toward living authentically. Once you stop pretending it isn't there, you start making choices that actually align with your path, instead of constantly measuring yourself against someone else's. That's when the pressure eases, and life starts feeling a little more like yours again. The first step to handling these struggles is actually simpler than most people think. It's noticing them. That's it, just noticing. Most of us spend so much time brushing things aside, convincing ourselves we're fine or pretending nothing is wrong, that we forget what it feels like to actually check in with ourselves. Carl Jung believed that the very act of acknowledging what's hidden takes away some of its power. When you ignore your struggles, they grow quietly in the background, shaping your thoughts, your actions, and even the way you show up to the world. But when you bring them into the light, even just for yourself, you take the first step toward regaining control. And here's the thing. This doesn't have to be dramatic or overwhelming. You don't need a perfect plan or a complete life overhaul. You just need a pause, a moment where you ask yourself honest questions. Am I really fine? Or am I saying it because it's easier? Am I holding back something I want to express? Am I comparing myself to others without realizing it? Even small, simple questions like these can start cracking the mask you wear, the one you show to the world that tells everyone you're in control. Jung would argue that curiosity is key here. You don't need to fix it immediately. You don't need to judge yourself for feeling the way you do. You just need to notice. Another part of this first step is allowing yourself to feel. One of the reasons we pretend everything is okay is that emotions can feel messy, inconvenient, or even scary. But the truth is, these feelings are messages. They tell you where you've been neglecting yourself, where tension is building, or where your needs aren't being met. Jung emphasized that suppressing these signals doesn't help. You end up carrying invisible weight that shapes every decision and interaction without you realizing it. So let yourself feel without judgment. Notice the tension, the hesitation, the subtle frustration. Label it, even if it's just to yourself, and watch how simply acknowledging it starts to ease the pressure. From there, awareness creates space. Space to pause instead of reacting automatically. Space to speak your truth, even in small ways. Space to slow down instead of rushing through life like a checklist. Space to stop comparing yourself, stop overthinking, and stop pretending. It's not a one-time fix. It's a habit. But the more you practice noticing these subtle struggles, the more control you reclaim from the parts of your life that have been running in the background, unnoticed. And finally, it's about patience. This first step doesn't magically solve everything. You're not going to stop struggling overnight. But when you start noticing, you start creating momentum. You start building a relationship with yourself that's honest and grounded. Jung would say that this is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming fully yourself, instead of living as the version of you everyone else expects. It's quiet, subtle, and sometimes uncomfortable, but it's incredibly powerful. Awareness comes first, reflection comes next, and slowly the load you've been carrying in silence begins to feel lighter, manageable, and entirely yours to navigate. So here's the bottom line. These 7 subtle struggles, pretending you have it all together. Feeling disconnected, holding back your opinions, constantly comparing yourself, saying I'm fine, second-guessing every decision, and feeling behind in life. They're not signs that you're failing. They're signs that you're human. And the first step to handling them is noticing them, giving yourself permission to feel, and creating that space where you can start being honest with yourself. Carl Jung would remind us that what we avoid doesn't disappear. It runs the show from behind the scenes. But once you shine a light on it, even just a little, the power shifts. You start reclaiming control over your own thoughts, your own choices, and your own life. You stop letting the quiet pressures dictate how you feel or what you do. You start living with intention instead of autopilot. So the next time you catch yourself saying, I'm fine, when you're not, or holding back because it's easier, or measuring yourself against someone else, pause for a second. Notice it, name it, and give yourself permission to be real, just for a moment.